don't think I've ever really had to start a podcast with this disclaimer right up front, but I do want to say that this episode isn't taking a political stance or political positions, but it is about what happens when personal speech collides with professional identity. And we're going to be looking at current events that have been happening all around us through this lens of brand and leadership and culture. And because whether we like it or not, personal expression can quickly become organizational expression, and that has consequences. And so for today, this isn't about right or wrong politically, but it is about reputation and trust and policy and this reality that people are both private citizens, but also brand representatives at the same time. And so that's my disclaimer. So I want to talk about this layer of risk that I think is going to set the tone for the things that we're going to be talking about, because every one of these situations creates some sort of exposure on multiple levels. And so I've written these down just so I don't leave anything out, but here's the types of risks that we all have to be thinking about. So there's this reputational risk. So there's this loss of trust among students and customers and donors and employees. We've got the media. We've got this media amplification that can quickly make things spiral out of control. And then we've got these long-term brand perception shifts that can happen. So that's one side of it. On the other side, we have the legal risk. So we've got First Amendment challenges for these public institutions. We have wrongful termination claims that can stem. We've got these contractual and policy inconsistencies. We've got litigation costs. We've got culture risk. So we can talk about employee morale and how all of these things can impact your team and your employees. Internal division. We've got fear-based communication culture. So we have to be mindful of when we start to put these divisions in place, like it could actually create fear, within your organization. And then we've got the financial risk of a business. We've got customer boycotts. We've got, again, donors can withdraw with the drop of a hat. We've got talent recruitment challenges. And so I think with all that being said, every single public reaction is a risk trade-off. And if you act, you risk backlash. But if you don't act, you risk that backlash. And I think this frames some of the things that are going to follow as being probably more strategic rather than partisan. So with that being said, we're going to dive into one of the first areas that I want to talk about. And this is, I think, setting the stage for a lot of what's to come. But this is going to be the social media side of things. And here's my first question to the both of you that I want to talk about. Social media, we've got Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram. Sky's the limit on all the channels. If your employer is listed on your profile, do you automatically represent that organization?
I have Voltthink on my bio on Instagram. And I'd say in this kind of creative field, like agency life, it's very much of like who you know and where you're working. So I feel like that's the reason why I have it up there. And I'd say also we're a small team, so each one of us does represent Voltthink.
100%. I agree there. And I even think if you don't list it on your profile, you still have that amount of risk associated with your account. People can look on team pages and find who you are. There are some really professional snoops out there that will figure out who you are, where you work, all of those things without a lot of details that you think you have public. So I would agree. I think you probably are a representative of your company. And especially as Francis said, we're a part of such a small team that we absolutely represent Voltthink. But even as you get into larger companies, it's going to be really hard for people not to associate where you work with who you are.
And I'd say it's not a secret where we work. So I personally have my profiles pretty much all public. And, we all have LinkedIn. So I'd say we do represent Voltthink.
Francis, I'm going to build off of what you just said. Your profile is public. Mine is private. I guess the question is, do you think visibility changes the responsibility of how you treat your social media platform? Knowing that you just said you've got your employer listed on your profile, right? you're
Mm-hmm.
public.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the question, does that change the responsibility since it's completely visible? Or do you even think about it?
Okay. I think I do care on like what I post on there. Like for me, I treat my social media as just like a way to share things that I experience and not necessarily like a place for me to voice out my beliefs. Yeah, if that makes sense. I feel like if I want to voice out my beliefs, I would go to like Twitter or Substack or something like that. But not necessarily like Instagram or LinkedIn and Facebook, unless it like personally affects me. I think that would be like the only way.
Yeah. And there's a story that we're going to reference today, but there was an employee that got fired from Ball State within the past few months that shared something on her private feed, and it was screenshotted and taken to a public feed and shared widespread. So I think it comes back to the thing that my parents taught me, that there is never anything that you put on the internet that you can get back again. If you're putting something out there, it is going to be completely visible in some way, shape, or form for the rest of time. So you really have to consider if private really is private when you're posting.
I'm going to give my own personal example with my social media accounts. They are all private, but that to me doesn't change the risk. And knowing that just because I have it set to private, it's not a risk management strategy like whatsoever. And so let's get into this whole illusion of privacy. Do people actually understand that screenshots completely erase any privacy setting that you have?
Absolutely. And, we've seen this even in platforms are understanding this in their user experience. There was a time where you could screenshot Snapchat and it wouldn't give the other person a notification. So you could be very sneaky about it. You could screenshot things without the other person's knowledge. And I almost wonder if that privacy piece came into play. And now there's a notification that happens. So at least it's an attempt to let you know that something that you thought was private may no longer be private. But yeah, the fact that it's even made its way into user experience, people should probably know that there's nothing they're putting out there that they can, completely get back.
Let's talk about the Ball State example, because I think it's a current event that happened. Was that last year that happened? I can't remember.
Yeah. So this comes from my alma mater, Ball State. There was a faculty member who was in a divisional leadership position. She shared a post that she wrote on Facebook, I believe, and it talked about the Charlie Kirk assassination. And it gave her own beliefs, and she shared it to what she thought was a private group, and that was screenshot and taken public. And so then her opinion intended for her private feed was blasted across a lot of different channels that were politically driven and brought a lot of discourse and attention to her and her position. So I think she received death threats. There was just a lot of commotion, even to her work phone, because being an employee of Ball State, a lot of that is very visible. It's kind of that you knew that she was going to be a part of Ball State. They have faculty members listed on their website. You even have opportunities to contact these faculty members through different pieces that Ball State chooses to display. And so Ball State then took steps to terminate her position because it was seen as a disruption to Ball State's community and not in guidelines with what she should be performing in the role. So that's the snapshot. There's a lot of detail and nuance to that, but that's the light overview.
And there's so much to say about this situation and how it happened, not from a political standpoint, but let's talk where Ball State is. Muncie, Indiana. We're talking about a tiny little Midwestern town in the state of Indiana, right? Muncie is not on the map. We're not talking big city. So they're small town that I think sometimes we think no one's going to come looking for me. I'm isolated. But then also what was crazy about this story was how quickly that spread like fire. President Donald Trump got a hold of it and then posted it on his own social platforms and made a public statement to Ball State and put them on notice. So we have this faculty member, her profile was private, but it didn't matter. To me, it's wild how something like this took off. But here's my question, based on the risk that was both to Ball State for not doing anything, but then also to the faculty member who was, using her own private social media platform to express her opinion. I guess I have questions around that. One, should organizations, and do they, because I don't know if I've ever heard of it, but should they proactively educate employees about the way they should be using their platforms? I don't know. Like, I feel like it's such a fine line. We've got First Amendment rights, but I don't know. Like, it's such a big question. There's no answer here at all, but I am curious to hear thoughts around that.
I feel like the internet, it's always changing. And I think this is kind of like, the past 2-3 terms is like really the first time we've seen the internet be used in like a political way. So I do think there should be guidelines for that. And beyond just like politics, there's so many things that the internet, like there's no rules against. It's kind of like the Wild West out here.
Absolutely. Yeah, legally, there's a lot of gray area there. I mean, when you think about a lot of precedents being set by court cases that take 5 years to get to anywhere or have to go through multiple courts, we're decades behind in legislating anything to do with the internet and social media.
And I'd say like, a lot of people, like they're looking for safe spaces. And I'd say like, especially like here, like in the Midwest, like community isn't like as big as somewhere like New York or like Chicago, like where you have like these super big cities. We, like a tiny town in Muncie, like she was probably looking for a community where she can voice out her opinion. And the bad thing about the internet is there's proof everywhere. It's basically like writing a book and like publishing it, and someone took that and then showed everybody.
With more instantaneous post times, less time to digest and think about what you want to say, and then unintended consequences of who will take it and run with it. The speed at which information travels on social media is really difficult to manage for everybody, even us as a brand. It's really interesting to look at things that went viral and say, why did that happen? But yeah, that internet speed and even how people are informed of it and where it goes from here, those rules haven't been built yet. So back to your question, Teresa, I would probably say that this is a new territory, just like Frances said, the Wild West for everybody. And starting to have those internal policies in place to guide people rather than kind of bind them by rules may just make everything a lot more clear without having those unsaid pieces that everybody has different ideas on. So giving guidelines as to what you post and how you post without regulating people, but then also letting people know the risks. I am sure the person at Ball State did not expect this post to go nationwide, but that is always a risk with something that you are posting or associating with yourself. So just making that clear and knowing the risks associated with posting things can help not only companies, but cultures feel more safe when they're interacting with spaces like social media.
I kind of have like a wild card thing, but okay. So we're talking about like being careful with social media, right? But when we're thinking about like the president, he's not very careful with social media. So I think there's kind of like a caveat, like, okay, like why would I do this if the person in charge doesn't really think about his brand?
Or
We can
does
cut that
he? Well, we can cut this out, but I have a hot take.
Erin, give us your hot take on that.
Yeah, I think the people that follow him approve of the use of his social media and what he says. So when we look at creating brand presence, him speaking loudly and publicly is something that his audience accepts and appreciates him for. So that is a very good brand audience alignment where they both have the same goals and communicate in the same way. So I don't know that I would copy and paste that for a lot of other brands without considering audience and goals in the same breath.
I think, too, you have to look at this risk of termination. Like, he's not going anywhere. He can say whatever he wants on his platform, and he knows exactly what he is doing. Like you said, he knows his brand. He knows his followers. He knows his audience, and he knows that there's very little that he could say that's going to have any sort of consequence for him, because we've seen it all over the board with him. Like, we've seen the good, we've seen the bad, we've seen the ugly. And I think very little has had an impact on his behavior as he's speaking. But if we think about it from, let's take a CEO who is a representative of a company. At what point does leadership play a role into representing the organization? The thing is, though, I think with a CEO, and you're talking thousands upon thousands of employees, a CEO is easily replaceable. You're not protected if you're a CEO because your shareholders technically are owners of the company, not the CEO. They're making decisions and changing things, but they can be replaced. The board can say, you're out or you need to step down and resign. They can't say that to the president of the United States. And so I think there is, Francis, to kind of like go back to what you were saying, it is a wild card, but I think you can look at it from the president, like his risk is so low. He's not being removed from office until his term is done. He knows his audience because his audience thrives on that. But then you have like the CEO of a corporation, their audience and their employees are going to be so blended and so differing perspectives. I don't think there's a fair representation. And I think a lot of businesses know that.
Teresa, you were speaking about how CEOs and leadership are easily replaceable. And I wanted to pivot and also talk about how visible they are and how much company brand is placed in their trust and what they do. But it's really interesting that your role in the company does seem to influence what people think of the company. And in leadership positions, we've seen that people assume this identity of the same brand. So not only are you your own person and a leader, but that leadership allows you to become almost a mouthpiece for the brand, and your actions and values are weighed against what the brand is perceived as. Brix Ice Cream recently had a co-founder repost and share information that was politically charged, specifically to current things that are happening relating to ICE, relating to January 6th. And they are in this area of Indianapolis. Brix Ice Cream is on the Monon in Broad Ripple. And so the community caught wind of this activity, and Brix Ice Cream as a company is now facing a lot of backlash. All over Reddit, their Instagram, on Facebook, there are a lot of people saying, I will never go back here because of this co-founder's post. So that is kind of the gist of that situation, that they are facing a lot of backlash for this one person's post.
I have so many thoughts and things to say about this. And I think some of them came from the comments that I was reading on both Facebook and Reddit. But I think this is really important for small business owners. No matter what, when you are a small company, you are the face of the brand and you are never off duty because you don't have enough people in your organization to where the reflection changes. I think when you're a small business, like you kind of create that culture and those values, right? And so I think that's probably my first hot take on this is this stems from a comment that they had put out on, I think it was Facebook, but here's what they said in response to one of their co-owners posting these things on social media. So this is coming from this ice cream shop, but they said, we want to address the concerns being shared about our business. We regret that posts made on a personal social media account and circulated have been attributed to our business. This is not us. For more than 15 years, we've worked hard to be a welcoming, generous, and community-focused small business. We strive to support our neighbors and neighboring businesses, the Broad Ripple Village Association, our customers, and our employees throughout the city. Our focus has always been and will remain serving our community with integrity and kindness and consistency. We appreciate those who have supported us over the years and have taken the time to understand who we are and what we stand for. So this was posted on their social media accounts. And I'm not going to go into what the owner actually said that's, made all this happen because it doesn't matter. I think what we have said in the beginning is enough. I want to read one more thing that they posted. So when on Facebook, they posted that as like the status update, and then they did a carousel of additional responses that went along with their status update. But here's the thing that I want to talk about that I think really started this firestorm. I don't know if it was necessarily like what they said in the status, but I'm going to read this because I think it dives in a little bit deeper. In any organization, even one as small as Brix, there can be a mix of views, philosophies, and beliefs among the owners, managers, employees, and customers. An individual's views do not represent the defining principles or core values of the business. I wanted to add that because I think it is so important. That's going to lead to like this discussion of owner, employee. Is there a difference? So let's start there.
Okay, so I think bricks, like the workers, example, it doesn't have to be bricks, but just in general, the workers, I think, represent the group, right? But at the end of the day, the person who's getting the most money is the owner. And I think that's why it makes a difference on who you're supporting, because even if they do all these nice things, if the owner, the person who is the direct representation of the business, if they make a mistake, they're the ones I think who have to face the consequences. If the worker like says something, they get fired. I think it'd be easier for them to like go somewhere else. Does that make sense?
I think what you're saying is the owner carries the weight and the responsibility.
And you said, Francis, that the owner's going to get the most money. And a lot of the comments that I saw were saying, I don't want to pay for this to forward these beliefs. Because in economics, we are taught that your dollar is a vote for everything that you purchase. This is why we see boycotts. And this is why we see that boycotts are effective, especially in economics and company growth. We've seen people that have gotten kind of snuffed out because people are withholding their purchases and money. So on the flip side, you illustrated that perfectly, Francis, that money is being used to forward and fund beliefs and values. So the risk then does still fall back on the owner, but then the purchaser as well to determine where their money goes and what values they want to align with. And I think that's what makes this so tricky is that brand is like the glue of all of that. It's how they interact with everybody and what they put their money towards and what that persona of the person, the business, the owner is as well.
To take a step back, she had a right to say what she said, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got First Amendment rights. So she said what she said. She put it out there. What went wrong? What do you think made it spiral?
Location.
A
lot of the comments referenced the small community base that Broad Ripple is based in, that everybody knows everybody. There is a lot of businesses that are founded by immigrants and people outside of the country. So when you think about the values that people have placed as living in Broad Ripple and interacting with Broad Ripple, that post felt like an outlier to that community and what they stood for.
And I think too, so of course, they're all up in arms about this and they're really trying to backpedal in some ways about what was said. And so we say she had every right to say what she said. You know, her beliefs are her beliefs and no one is trying to take that away. But I think on the other side of it, the community has a right to react in the way that they react, right? One of the comments that I'm looking at right now that someone had said is freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. And I think that is so true is we can say whatever we want to say. I don't think anyone is taking that away from anyone, but we have to think longer than what our fingers are typing on the keyboard because that's going to be out there. And what you say, you can't take back. And I think you hit it on the head. Erin, do you think that if this was another business in another area that wasn't like this, we all know Broad Ripple, right? Like, do you think that could have made a difference?
I think it probably wouldn't have gone as far into the inflamed rhetoric as it is with Broad Ripple. I think a lot of people would have disregarded it or supported it, quite honestly. So it is interesting that it was such a misalignment of values to what the community stood for and what was posted that there was this charge around it and this just opposition where people hit head on after it.
So looking at one of these other comments, and I think this is going to get into my next question, but someone had commented that people are allowed to have their own point of view without being persecuted or put out of business for it. They go on to say that those of us who are mentally mature enough to accept people are allowed to have whatever views they want because that's life. But I get I get what they're trying to say is people can have their views without being persecuted. They should, right? But I think again, like this is the whole point isn't about what she can and can't say. I think what it is she is a representative of the business that she has created because she is a small business. And there's not enough layers of removal, for her. Like, she can't just get fired for what she said. This isn't a CEO where, shareholders and boards can replace and force people to step down. This isn't the president of the United States, who nothing is going to happen for what he says. This is a small business who is literally the business. And so my question is, what do business owners need to think about when there isn't those layers of separation? There's not enough insulation to remove and insulate what they've said from the operations of the business.
I'm going to take this one because I love the idea of insulation. And I think social media has even taken the insulation down thinner, that things are more accessible, easier to put out, and more quick to be seen by people. I think a lot of it, as a piece of advice, would be go back to what you can control. It would be really great if people weren't persecuted for their different views, or this, I hear cancel culture being pushed around as a word a lot. Those are things that culture is probably not going to get over today, tomorrow, the next week, the next year. And so the things that you can control are what you put out there, and thinking about being intentional with that and how to connect with your audiences, and maybe thinking twice if something may go beyond what you intend it to be. Because we can say something, but the way that is perceived is something we cannot control.
I've got another question. So knowing all of this, like we're talking about like these layers of separation and insulation, when you're looking at a small business, can a founder separate personal politics from their company's brand identity?
That's a heated topic. As a person literally in the shoes,
Yeah.
I feel like you are the most qualified person to speak on this.
From my perspective, the answer is no. I don't think a founder can separate their personal politics from their, the company's brand identity. And I think that's because a lot of small businesses are built on relationships. Like, I am very much, and BoldThink is very much a relationship driven business, and we provide a service. Like, it's not like we're selling products. And so what I mean by that is I am sometimes the product that I sell. To be quite honest, people pay me for my knowledge and my experience. That is the business transaction. And so that means I probably represent so many different viewpoints because of just these relationships that I have with clients and their businesses. So I am the product. Just like, I would say, Francis and Aaron, you guys are sometimes the product. Yes, you are doing a design, and you are doing projects. But I would also say, like, they're paying for you to perform a service. And so you are representing, I would have to say, BoldThink's brand, whether we want to say we are or not. So that is my response to that. Now, I want to flip it and go to, let's say you are the CEO of an organization that employs 50,000 people. I think there's enough insulation there to where I feel like they probably have a little more ways to separate, just because, again, I don't think a CEO can speak for 50,000 people. I really don't, unless you're in politics. That's a whole different story, right? Like, which side, you're going on with politics. Like, so you kind of can. But I think when we start a business, we have to know, especially as we're growing, we are the brand.
And it goes back to something we talked about a long time ago with humanized brands from the book Sapiens. I think I quoted that your brand used to be a person-based thing. There were family brands, and the person who ran it took on all liability of that brand. And that's why LLCs were created, to separate insurance and liabilities from that person so they could continue to work and live even if something happened reputationally to their company. But that connection to brand and reputation has never gone away. And I think that's exactly what you hit the nail on the head with, Teresa, where there can be separation, but there's never a true distinct difference. You're always going to have that risk in those positions.
And I think it's different for employees. I think employees are the ones that probably definitely have more insulation, whether it's a small business or a large organization. I think there's less weight tied to what an employee says versus what an owner says. But I have to go back to this Ball State example because this is just something it bothers me a little bit. But one of the things that when this faculty member made her statements and Ball State terminated, they made some sort of comment, and I can't remember exactly what it was word for word, but it went back to it's not a representation of our values. And my first thought when I read that was, well, what are your values based on what she said? Like, so are you picking a side, Ball State, or are you just saying that out of fear? I think that was the thing that really bothered me. Like, does Ball State have politically charged values here? Like, I'm trying to understand what that was.
And it goes back to what you just said about in a organization with 50,000 people, how can you speak for everyone and be representative of everyone when you try to choose sides or try to be strong in that opinion. I went back to find the full quote, and it was that the administrator's post was inconsistent with the distinctive nature and trust of her leadership. And they did go on to talk about that it was a significant disruption on campus. I knew there was a thing where it said values. So I think that's interesting. I was looking for the exact quote, but I couldn't find it.
I was just thinking like it could have been like in one of the hundreds of articles that were posted around this. Yeah, but even so, like, okay, let's take the values out of it. You know, since I can't tie it back to a specific quote. I know I read it somewhere, but let's talk about disruption because that's interesting to me in the fact that in the last week, all of these students at high schools have been doing protests and walkouts, which is clearly disruptive of any type of environment. It doesn't matter. And it's a large, organized school walkout. It made news, so if anyone wants to go look, they can read about it. But my question is, this was on her Facebook profile page, made private. What made it the disruption? Was it her action that was the disruption? Because that's technically the only thing that she can say she did. Was it the media who made it a disruption because it put all of this attention onto the university, which to me, she couldn't control that because unless Ball State has clear contractual agreements in place that says what you can and cannot say on your time off campus, on your private social media pages, I'm trying to think of the question that I'm asking here because it's, can they really fire her for something that she didn't do? She didn't cause the media storm and the disruption. She made a post.
Objectively, you could say that the person who posted the screenshot was the catalyst for the disruptor. But in the chain of events, if that person had never posted that post, they would never have to talk about it. And it wouldn't have gotten to this. So I think probably the liability would fall on the person who had originally posted it, which in fairness or a court of law, they'll have to decide what that is. There is a legal lawsuit going to talk about her rights as a worker and what she was terminated for. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. We might have to have a round 2 when we get to that point to then talk about how Ball State deals with the ongoing news of all of this as a PR and brand lens. We can get it.
Thank you for being objective, first of all, because I think like I am one of those individuals who I want to see all of the sides and the facets that go into major organizational changes like this. And especially like when it's such a blend of First Amendment rights and politics and organizations. I want to make some comments about what can employers consider as they're moving forward, because I don't think it's a question of right or wrong. So how do we move forward for this and how do we learn from this? And so I think for me as an employer, I think I need to ask and look at like, are my social media policies clear? Do I even have social media policies that talk about what my employees can or can't do? Obviously, like this is not legal advice because you need to get a lawyer involved to make sure that you are not infringing on anybody's rights. I'm going to go back to Ball State University. If we are having these organizations and we are giving them the ability to terminate someone based on what they posted on social media, I want to know as a future employee, okay, well, what does that mean? What can or can't I say? You know, people, no matter where they're at, they're feeling this. So are your social media policies clear But more importantly, how are you consistently enforcing them? Because
Yeah.
I can promise you, whether you're a faculty member, student, whoever, you know things were said around that time, hateful or loving or whatever on both sides. So how are you going to monitor and enforce these policies that are in place? I don't think you can, but I think that's where you really need to sit down and talk with a legal representative and a lawyer around what are these clarity of expectations. Like if you're going to use social media, you are going to put me as your employer on your profile. We need to talk about what is deemed okay to post and not okay to post. And I think the third thing is, do employees understand what it means to represent your brand? Do they know? Or is it just I just got employed, I'm going to list this on my profile, boom, done. Like, do they even think beyond that?
I would say, like, at least from my perspective, from what you said earlier, how you think that your values do align with who you are as a business owner. As an employee, when I'm looking at different companies, I look at like what you represent. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to Bold Think was, okay, like, it's woman led and it works with like a lot of nonprofits. So in the same way where uh, employers look at employees and their values, I think it's the same way whenever I look at companies. I want to look for a company that aligns with my personal values as well. Like I obviously don't want to work for a company that believes in XYZ that I don't believe in. But when posting on social media, I feel like having your personal opinion, it's a fine line, but I would say if you do want to post, the thing that I would post are facts, because that's something that you can't really flip. I would say as long as it's not hateful and you stick to the facts, I think it's okay to post it on social media because you can't change the facts.
Francis, I'm going to build on what you have just said. So I think you're also talking about the employee side. And I think there's some considerations for an employee that, they need to do to protect themselves, right? They can't just lean on the employer to be the only one setting the tone, because I think there's a lot of things that employers can or can't say or control. So I think for employees, there's a few things that I would say needs to be considered. But like one, if your employer is publicly listed in your bio, whether that's LinkedIn or Facebook, we have to understand, and employees have to understand, that your speech and your message might be interpreted through some sort of lens that you may not have intended it to be interpreted through. Same thing with audiences, right? Like you might think that you are speaking to your own curated friends and family on your private Facebook page. But with social media, I think we have to know that the audience might not interpret it the way that we wanted it to land. And I think that's something that employees really have to be mindful of. I would also say that privacy settings doesn't mean they're going to be contained to just your channel. We talked about screenshots. We talked about context being changed. And so I think with that, we have to keep in mind that what we are posting right now, can it be misconstrued later? And I think we have to ask as employees, would I be comfortable if this reached my employer, the clients, or media? Like, I think like that's a golden rule. I used to tell my kids, I still tell my kids, if what you're posting on social media, can your grandmother see it? Like, that's like kind of my thing. How would your grandmother feel if this got around to her? And I think that's, starts to set the stage for what they post, but they've posted some really weird stuff. Everyone needs to be mindful, whether you are a CEO or a small business owner or an employee, that roles do matter. And leadership, whether we like it or not, is going to carry higher visibility and higher accountability. But we also have to keep in mind that public-facing roles definitely carry a brand association too. And I think, it's not about whether it's fair. I just think its responsibility scales with that visibility. And I think the last thing that I want to talk about is this risk tolerance, because at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about all of the risks, the pros and cons about whether you are a business or an employee of that business. There's risk all around. Everybody shares in that risk. And we have to keep in mind everyone has the right to speak. Everyone has the right to say what they're going to say, whether we agree with it or not. But we also have to know that everyone shares and absorbs those consequences of that speech. Like, there is no less risk, whether we say it privately or publicly or in a work environment or sitting at a bar with our friends. And so I think the question for everybody is going to be, what's your risk tolerance for what you are about to say? Are you willing to lose your job? Are you willing to lose clients? Are you willing to shut down your business because you can't hold your tongue for 30 seconds that it takes for you to type out that post and push publish? And to me, it has nothing to do with censorship. It's just understanding the consequences that has been made possible. Thank you, social media. And I want to close out because I know like this is probably our longest podcast, and I feel like we can go on for an hour about this, but we have to understand that in business, a brand and that reputation isn't confined to your website or your own company's social media platforms. A brand lives in behavior that is both leadership and employees. And it's about culture and how it lives in those organizations. And so, again, I just want to close this out by saying that we're in an era where I think personal expression and professional identity are going to be forever intertwined. Like, there's no separating them. And I think all of these current events that we have talked about today are examples that as we live in a digital world, we no longer have our personal lives and our opinions that are just to ourselves. And so with that being said, I hope, this podcast has resonated with people, but my biggest hope is that it gets everybody to think that it's not about right or wrong. It's not about fair or not being fair. It's not about our rights, and what the Constitution says. It's just understanding the consequences that come from it.